Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that UBC Okanagan, which is where I'm speaking from today, is situated in the unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan Nation and their peoples. And I'd also like to recognise that all of you are joining us from many places around the world and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. My name's Roger Sugden. I work at UBC in the Okanagan. I'm actually especially interested in regional socio-economic development, so I'm really looking forward to this discussion about reimagining economic development futures. We've got a great set of speakers lined up, so I think we'll be able to learn a lot and think and have fun, and it's going to be fun. This webinar is deliberately conceived as some sort of melting pot for ideas and thinking and discussion, indeed ultimately action, leading to action. The speakers are from diverse places in terms of socioeconomic systems and characteristics, experiences, histories. Each of the speakers is going to address different aspects and issues that we're faced with and that challenge us when we think about economic development futures, where we'll be and could be 20 years or so from now, and how we might get there. The sorts of questions in general that we have in mind include whether there are challenges that regions, even ones that might at first sight seem quite different, are there challenges that we have in common that we can address collaboratively, in learning together, acting together, and designing perhaps policies and so on in cooperation. It's also worth adding, I think, that the participants in the webinar today are from very many countries. As of yesterday, well over 100 people had registered for the webinar, and from countries, around the world: US, UK, France, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Ireland, Mexico, Portugal, Hong Kong, Bolivia, Colombia, Argentina, Sweden, Chile, and more, actually. Indeed, the webinar itself has been developed and organized by a group of people from around the world as well, spread across 4 continents. And some of those people have been organizing and developing the webinar you're going to meet shortly when they present. We've been having actually weekly discussions and so on since January, and discussing since the fall more generally. I would like to acknowledge at the beginning, if I may, a couple of people who aren't presenting today, although they're participating. And those 2 people have played very prominent roles in developing this webinar. One is Mbakiso Morapedi, who works for the Ministry of Presidential Affairs, Governance and Public Administration in Botswana. And the other is Roberto Horta from the Institute of Competitiveness in Uruguay. To get things rolling, it's now my great pleasure to introduce a colleague from UBC who will share some opening remarks. So Ananya Mukherjee-Reid, UBC Okanagan's Provost and Vice President Academic. Over to you, Ananya.
Thank you, Roger. I'm so delighted to be here today and to see this, how we've come together, not only in the participants of the webinar, but also, as Roger just mentioned, those of you who are joining us from around the world. This is a thought that indeed has dominated our experience through the pandemic, that we are in some ways maybe more and more isolated, but then again, maybe more and more connected. And while having one of our discussions with Roger, this is the thought that inspired this webinar, that how do we reimagine the local in a way that the global and local are actively, proactively, should I say, and continuously mutually constituted. We say that, we write books about that, but it seems that the pandemic kind of really posed that question in an existential way, particularly to universities. that can we seize this moment to see how the local and global in fact can come together while maintaining the distinctness of the local? Where are our commonalities? Where is the stake? Where can we come together? And I am particularly interested in the role of the university in this question. As some of you know, this particular campus of the University of British Columbia has a very explicit mandate of regional economic development, but all universities can and should think about their role in social and economic change, particularly in these times. Now, while there is quite a bit of thinking and research around the role of the universities, it still tends to focus on the university's creation of individual capacity through our degrees and programs of learning, through knowledge, through research, through the production of innovation and research. However, the role in broader structural systemic change in the dynamics of social change is still a work in progress, and perhaps it will always be. So I see that as a particular question that we can also begin to explore through the collaboration that this webinar is forging. I know that many of you already have done work in that area. There is a very well-known model, more in the US, less well adopted in Canada, which looks at the university as the anchor institution in its local economy, society, and the fabric. And there are many ways in which different universities have explored their anchor role through education, through research, through innovation, and through their practices. And I think as we think about the recovery from this pandemic, which has so deeply affected local economies and the social fabric in such a variety of ways, this is a very important time to think of that role of the connections that the university can forge, convene, and take forward for broader structural and social change. So I will stop there with those thoughts, and I'm very much looking forward to this webinar. And I, as you know, we've already sort of thought of this webinar. This is the first of many, and I look forward to an active collaboration with all of you in the days to come. Thank you, and back to you, Roger.
Thanks, Ananya. It's great. Yep, active collaboration to seize the moment, I think. The webinar is actually co-hosted by UBC's Okanagan campus and orchestra, the Basque Institute of Competitiveness. So now I'd like to ask, if I may, Ivan Martin, the chair of orchestra, to say some opening remarks. And maybe as I hand over, maybe I can also say that I've had the privileged opportunity to work with colleagues at orchestra over a long period of time. And it's always so interesting to hear about their unique work and the way they go about impacting social and economic activity and practice. Ivan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. I really appreciate the words and the compliments about orchestra. Orchestra is, as many of you know, is a research institute specialized in the analysis of regional competitiveness. We are located in the Basque Country, and our mission is to undertake action research that has a direct impact on the competitiveness and well-being of our region. This is what we call inclusive competitiveness. To achieve that, we work very closely with a wide range of stakeholders in the region, the government, the administrations at different levels, companies, universities. So it's really a true public-private partnership to address these competitiveness issues. The Basque Country has had always a tradition of thinking strategically about its economic development, having adopted a long-term industrial strategy. I mean, 24% of our GDP comes from industry during the 80s, at a time where I would say it was not really fashionable to do so. No? Now, the pandemic and other larger societal changes like the climate emergency, they are generating a new context in which strategic thinking, I believe, is even more important. And much of the research that we are doing at Orchestra is focused on understanding what will drive the competitiveness and well-being of the region in the next 20 years. So we are thinking, I would say, for the next generation of Basque people. So this webinar is a wonderful opportunity to share those reflections and to learn from others in a very different context, but also facing, I would say, similar or shared challenges. Indeed, many of the biggest challenges that we are facing require solutions that are globally connected. So it's great to see, as Roger was describing at the very beginning, so many participants from so many diverse regions that are going to add a lot of flavor to the discussions during today's conversation. So I am just looking forward for these discussions and hope that today's seminar, and hopefully continuously other seminars that we will have in the future, will be the start of an international learning process that will continue over the coming years. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best during this afternoon session.
Many thanks, Ivan. That's great. So here's what to come then, in what's coming in the rest of the session. In a moment, I'm going to introduce the three presenters who come from West Bank First Nation, the Basque Country, and from Uruguay. I'll be very brief and leave each of them to say more or maybe correct or alter anything that I've said in the beginning. Then each panelist is going to share a short presentation, about 10 minutes each. And at the end of the final presentation, we'll open things up for a question and answer session. We're going to use the Zoom Q&A feature. So you can ask questions at any time during the webinar, like from now on, or as it were, you just ask questions through that Q&A feature. You go to the icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, the Q&A icon, in order to do that. You can also participate by liking questions, and then those likes count as votes, and so the questions will be ordered. So the most liked questions will be appearing higher in the list. The Q&A part is going to be moderated by Jamie Wilson from Orchestra. And then the plan is that I'll maybe come back at the close for a few words, depending on how we're doing for time and so on. We'll see how that goes. So our first presenter this morning is going to be Jordan Coble. Jordan's a councillor with West Bank First Nation here in the Okanagan. Prior to being on council, he was the Cultural and Operations Administrator for the Century Heritage Museum of West Bank. He's on multiple boards, many of which are focused on the cultural sector and are particularly concerned with inclusiveness and being respectful and honest. Jordan will then hand over to our second presenter, Marie-Jose Arangaran, General Director of Orchestra and also Professor in Economics at Deusto University in Spain. Maria works on competitiveness and territorial strategy, clusters, networks, and the analysis of policies and evaluation of policies. She's led a lot of projects internationally as well as domestically, and published loads. Okay, books, journal articles, and so on. Maria will then hand over to our third presenter, Michaela Camacho, the director of the Competitiveness Institute at the Catholic University in Uruguay. Mika also works, researches and teaches on regional competitiveness, innovation, clusters, industrial policy. She focuses especially on sustainable socioeconomic development, and also led loads of projects and published in international journals and books and so on. So Mika will anchor the presentations, so to speak. But first off, it's Jordan Coble. So Jordan, over to you, and everyone, just please enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just gonna pop up my slides here, which is not starting on the right slide. Fantastic, off to a good start. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jordan Coble. As Roger mentioned, today I'm a council member for Westbank First Nation, so I'm an elected official within my community, within our government. So Westbank First Nation, it's a pretty unique organization. But before I begin, I just want to thank everybody for being here, for being in attendance. It's quite nerve-wracking knowing that I'm talking to the world right now, and I'm really proud of that, but I'm also humble. I want to acknowledge the good work of Roger, UBCO, and Orchestra for putting this on. I truly believe in collaboration. That's how Roger and I got to know one another, is just basically just getting to know one another and sharing our history. But one thing I want to point out is that introductions in our community are very important. They're the most important aspect of relationship building. And so as much as I have 10 minutes, which I haven't even started my timer yet, it would take me much longer than 10 minutes just to introduce myself. So I'm just going to try to do it briefly. And I apologize for not being able to truly introduce who I am, where I'm from, and how it interconnects with what we're doing here today. But what we see in front of you right now is the word on top is Siyil. And that's the name that we use for the name of our entire nation. So Westbank First Nation is one community within 7 bands, 7 First Nation communities within the Canadian side of the border. And then on the American side of the border, we have the Colville Confederated Tribes, who are also part of our nation in the beginning. So Westbank is one government within all of that interworkings. The rest of the bands in Canada are Indian Act bands. They're not self-governing, so there's a bit of a difference there, but we're all one. So what we see here, that word Siyil, the spiral that you see there is the actual translation for that word. Siyil, the S in front of that of Siyil is the person identifier, so it's basically I'm a noun. The Yil is that spiraling motion, and so me as an individual, I spiral myself and interconnect with all the things that I interconnect with, all the people, all the waters, all the lands, the resources, and I affect them and they affect me. And that's where you get that X on the end of there. And so it's not an English sounding X, it's a hissing cat. And that sound is the sound of friction. So as I'm spiraling down, I create friction all around me, and that's what brings the things along, and that's what takes a little bit of me away, and that's how we shape our understanding of who we are. And so I basically I've created I think 7 slides here, and every slide is based on my language, which is in Kalokchin or in Siyilchin. So Siyil is not just our language; it's also how we were identified as a nation traditionally prior to contact. But as you can see there's a few things that I'm going to take into consideration. How we got here, which is important. Knowing our history is absolutely important, into knowing how our relationships are going to be able to move forward. Understanding that truth is foundational to our understanding of one another and how we interconnect so that we can be supportive of one another. Then I'm going to explain the work that we do today. So nakulamentit, that the core word of that word, nakulamentit, is kul, which is to create or to fix or to address. It's basically a generic term, but it's also very specific in that it's always about creating something. It's not taking away something. Then we also acknowledge in our laws that people are going to come and go. Animals, they come and go. So there's interaction, but everything within us, everything within all of our relationships understands that everybody provides a gift to one another. They provide a gift to the land, but we have to live in a reciprocal fashion so that if we're going to take something, we also have to give back whatever we can. And then from there, we're going to just briefly talk about our journey forward and how we've become what we are and kind of clarify a few things. And then what's most important to me is that reflection back, because this is that understanding that if we don't understand how we got here, we're not going to know where we're going to go. And so we have to understand the effects that we have, what we have taken over this amount of time. And so because we haven't been living in a reciprocal fashion, so we have to figure out how do we give back now. And that's how we kind of address climate change, because climate change has been ongoing and we've been taking and taking and taking, but we haven't really started to give back. And that's why we're in such a crisis. Now, that's what I understand anyways, based on my beliefs. And then just a conclusion, and I'll explain that when we get to that point. And I'm already getting low on time. So to put this in context, British Columbia is in Canada. It's the western province in Canada. So if you look over here, we have highlighted in yellow, British Columbia. And down at the very bottom here is my artistic rendering of our nation territory map, and which is blowing up here right in the middle. You can see it, it kind of has a shape of an animal, and I'll let you use your imagination to understand that. And so in this territory, this is a map of our entire traditional territory. And you have to understand that there's a lot of gray area that surrounds our borders with neighboring nations, shared resources, shared understanding, shared protection, shared defense mechanisms. But there's also conflict in there as well. We would have conflicts with the Secwepemc, the Shuswap folks to the north, the Lil'wat, and everyone around us. We'd have conflicts once in a while. But we'd also have an understanding that Okanagan people right here, where we're located here, is West Bank First Nation, but this entire nation was comprised of many, many, many nations that had personal autonomy, that had localized governance structures, and that we acknowledge that although we could live just within our own communities, our quality of life was much better when we shared amongst one another, had protocols so that we understood what we could take, how much we had to give back, and everything above. So within here, you can look at 69,000 square kilometers of our traditional territory. West Bank First Nation, you can barely even see us on our own map. We have 5 small parcels that are called reserve lands, 2 of which are our main community core, which I'm kind of on the west side of Okanagan Lake here. And then we have forestry lands essentially out on the east side of the lake. But you can barely see our own community within our own map. And that's due to colonization, the loss of land, the preemption of lands, and then the reserve structure that came through the Indian Act. And what we have here basically is a picture of our community. It gives you a good sense as to what our community core is. So when I think of our community, it's our homes. It's right here is our community center. Our health and our healing takes place. Our housing is around here. We have beautiful lakefront properties, but it's a very dynamic and unique community and government. So West Bank First Nation, in general, we have about 5,340 acres over 5 parcels of lands. We have 150 acres of community forest, and that's important to note because those aren't considered reserve lands. Those are up in the wilderness. That's our forest lands where we issue the tenures and basically at this point manage the forest, about 100,000 acres of community forest. In general, we have about 855 WFN members, so our population is quite low. But people that live on our lands, we have over 10,000 non-members, so people who aren't West Bank First Nation members who live on our lands and pay taxes. To operate this entire structure, we have 204-ish employees, and it's very structured in a hierarchical sense where we have our membership up top, chief and council, director of operations, and then 7 various departments that oversee things like legal, health and wellness, financials, your basic governance structure. And that's what our self-government agreement is the administrative capabilities to operate and function as a government. We also have a corporate size that has 6 portfolios. We have an economic development commission, and we've experienced tremendous growth since 2005 when we became self-governing. We have 522 businesses on reserve, and our assessed value of all of our capital assets is over $2.5 billion. And I find this is important because although we're talking about the future of the economy, I believe the future of our economy is based on our system here, a localized government that takes care of itself, that is self-sufficient. COVID is a prime example of that. When we have a positive case confirmed, and it does happen in our community because we're neighboring the city of Kelowna and the city of West Kelowna, and then major other cities throughout our region here. And so we have a lot of interaction with general public. So when we have a positive case, we identify it, but we work locally with our own health services team, our own nurse practitioners. We do our own testing. We supplement that with interior health testing, and we communicate with one another to make sure that they know what we know, but we also take care of what we know quicker and faster because we know our people. So it's a localized, very progressive government. What we have to acknowledge is that what people have come and they've shared in our lands, but they've also destroyed a lot of our lands and our understanding. So everyone has something to offer, but we also have to understand how to balance that. And so we have colonization, we have changes in governance, we had changes in our economy. And a lot of it was built on the zero-sum paradigm that if the natives are able to get something, it's at the expense of the non-Indigenous peoples. And so we have to reverse that, because that's not by any means the actual truth. So we have to keep that in mind. So what way our government structure works is Westbank First Nation, because we're self-governing, we create our own laws. And so those laws then get turned into policies, which create work and responsibilities, generating an economy, which creates more impacts, issues, and vision, because all that beautiful economy just garners more growth within our organization, but also on our lands. And so if you look at all these arrows, I see these arrows not as just a natural progression, but as ripples or as struggles or as issues that come up. And in between there's those issues, we have to figure out what our next steps. Sometimes we get caught in a loop where we don't create laws, we just generate policies, or we just start to fill positions, and that creates a conflict in and of itself. Where we want to get to. So there's a couple slides back. I'll go back here. Oh, going back the wrong way. Well, I stopped sharing. But anyways, a couple slides back. I'm pretty much done anyways. That last image was of our forestry company. So that was what you saw in one of those images was clear-cut forest, the destruction of our lands. Where we're moving towards is a stewardship of lands, an understanding of our impacts on the economy, not just on the revenues and the expense side, but the impacts on the environment, the impacts on our mental health, and how we create a space for addressing climate change. So it's not just something that we write a law about and that makes us look really good as politicians. It's something that we write a law about and we flow it throughout our organization, so that hierarchical structure of our government will now start to be blended, so that if we have climate change as a high priority, we're not going to create a department out of it, although that's the natural thing to do. If you have a housing issue, you create a housing department. We want to flow that between each and every department, because it affects our mental health, it affects our economy, it affects our communications, everything, or even our legal structures. And so what we want to do is encourage that spiraling, but spiral all those issues, COVID, health issues, economy, climate change, throughout our organization. So it's a holistic approach of addressing the issues, understanding the symptoms of those issues, but identifying the core reasons as to why we're there. So I'll leave it there. I'm going to pass it over to Marie Jose Orangaran. Thank you very much for allowing me to share some time. And if you have any questions, by all means, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jordan, for such an inspiring presentation. And it's a real pleasure to participate in this event, to reflect and learn about such an interesting and also complex issue of how to build competitiveness and well-being of territories, of our territories. The reflection that I'm going to share is based on different analyses that we developed at Orchestra, but also are conclusions that comes from different dialogues that we have with different stakeholders, as Ivan mentioned at the beginning of this session, saying that we work in very connection and collaborating with the governments, companies, universities, and different kind of institutions also in the Basque Country. So there are just some initial reflections also to discuss and to think how we can learn and improve the competitiveness and the well-being of different territories. So first, I will give some context information about the Basque Country, and then I will share the main challenges that we have at this moment in the Basque Country, according with these reflections, to build an inclusive and sustainable competitiveness for our territory. So regarding the context, the Basque Country is a small region with 2.2 million inhabitants located in the north of Spain. It's a region with the highest GDP per capita in Spain and also on the top 30 regions in Europe. We have had a very good balance on economic development and social cohesion and a good social progress also. Regarding our industrial structure, our companies and activities are very specialized or metal manufacturing activities, such as automotive, machine tools, and so on. And we export 33% of our GDP. And it's a region with a very high level of policy autonomy, especially on different socioeconomic issues. We have competencies to develop our own health, education, industrial innovation, even fiscal policies. We collect our own taxes, which is not the case, for instance, for the rest of the autonomous communities in Spain, and it gives us a lot of capabilities also to develop adapted policies to our region. And we have also a very rich and complex governance structure, which help us to arrive to different agents and citizens to all the territory. We have the regional government, but we also have 3 provincial councils, and we have all over the territory different local development agencies that are working in connection, especially with small firms and so on. So they help also to connect the needs that they have in order to define better policies to address competitiveness issues and to develop our territory. So after this context presentation, and regarding the challenges that we have to build the future inclusive and sustainable competitiveness, I'm going to highlight that different more for specific challenges that we have, but all of them fall under the overarching challenge that we have at this moment of integrating today's big challenges, especially connected with the 3 big transitions in our regional strategy. And we have the challenge also to make possible the industrial and technological transformation that these big challenges, regarding the opportunities that these big challenges generate also for our territory. Even the European Commission launched in the context of the pandemic at this moment, a huge program called Next Generation EU, which emphasizing the need at this moment to go ahead on the green, digital, and just transition in Europe. So for this, we see to address these 3 challenges, we have 3 specific challenges. For instance, position and sustainability as a competitive advantage that will create industrial and industrial technological opportunities. And it will be particularly important to innovate, especially on the food system, the mobility system, and also on the energy system, areas in which we have, which has very significant impacts on the environment and also on the emissions. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic prompted discussions around the need that we have to better integrate foundational elements of the economy, such as health, care, education, and food, as fundamental pillars of territorial competitiveness. So we have to work on the potential of the foundational economy as a source of opportunity for the economic development in the Basque Country. And beside this, we have also to foster on 2 key transversal aspects that we consider that are key, very relevant to strengthen the competitiveness in all the sectors and also facilitate transitions, which are digitalization and development of some specific skills. So on the one hand, we need to promote the role of digital transformation, and we need to improve the capabilities and competencies in companies, administrations, and society in general, so that digitalization translates into new business activities and increases also demand of the citizens on this issue. And on the other hand, we have the challenge to develop some human skills, not only hard skills, but also and cognitive skills, but also soft skills, that the 3 transitions, the green and digital and the socio-demographic transitions, demand from people. So we need to close the gap that we have among the supply and the demand of the skills at the territory. And in this issue, vocational training centers and universities has a lot to do also to connect better the offering and the capabilities that we are developing in the educational system with the production and the activities that we have at the territory. So we need much more strategic collaboration among these two worlds. And going to the 4 more specific challenges that we have a challenge on the public administration that we need they to be catalysts in the development of these transitions at the territory level. And for this, we think that they have to work especially in 3 key aspects. The first one is to integrate the demand side into the policies and to invest in infrastructure in ways that guarantee the effective use of both physical infrastructure, but also knowledge infrastructure. We have a tradition of proposing and developing quite offer-oriented policies. For instance, we develop a strong network of technological centers and so on that are very important for the development of our industry, but we need to develop them, or we need to include in this a more demand-side approach in order to work the use of this kind of infrastructure from the industry. The second point at the public administration level, we'll see to promote also public sector innovation and social innovation to generate new social relationship and new models of collaboration, and that are necessary to embrace these big societal challenges, because they are very complex challenges that need the involvement of very different kind of actors, and we need to experiment, learn, and improve the ways of how we can facilitate these kind of processes in order to address these challenges. And the third key issue will be enhancing also the collaboration, the collaborative governance of the strategy. Collaborative governance among different levels of government, which is the multi-level governance, but also a collaborative governance with the involvement of different actors in the development of the territorial strategy. There are some very good experiences also in the Basque Country on how to do this, but we are learning by doing on these approaches in order to, and I think that what we develop until now will be very useful also to address the challenges that we have to address the transitions at this moment. On the aspect of more economic, scientific and technological activities, we have the challenge to orient these activities towards industry-based sustainable transition. Given the characteristics of the 3 main transitions, the transformation of the Basque industry requires strengthening not only technological innovation, but also we need to combine this with non-technological innovation, because we see that when we are able to combine both technological and non-technological innovation, the results improve in competitiveness, results, and so on. Another challenge that we have at this moment is connected with the role that intermediary agents could have in order to strengthen the development of this long-term strategy. We need to have an intelligence on which kind of value chains we need to develop, and also which kind of needs we have at territorial levels in different kind of SMEs. And for that, for instance, the cluster associations, which are intermediary agents that work with firms and other agents in different value chains, have good capabilities in order to have this sectoral value chain-based intelligence. And local development agencies, which are the other intermediary agents, that are working in networks with SMEs, educational agents, companies, and so on, have a a quite good intelligence of the needs that the SMEs have at the territory, and the connection of the government with the local development agencies help to identify also better which are the needs of some kind of SMEs in order to define better policies and more adapted policies in order to improve their competitiveness. And last but not least, at firm level, it will be key to develop policies in order to boost the ambidexterity of firms, especially SMEs, because these transitions are generating a particular need to strengthen the capacity, to combine the capacity that firms have to explore new paths of development, alongside to explore the capabilities and the capabilities that they have already. So this will be critical in order to combine the development of activities and economic development in short with the development of activities and competitiveness in the long term. We need to explore the capabilities that we have already, but also to explore new ones in order to be competitive in the long term. So these are some starting reflections for discussion later on. Thank you very much for your attention. And now, Micaela, it's your turn. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Marijo, for a great presentation. Also, thank you, Jordan, for doing the same. And especially thank you to UBC and Orchestra for putting together this amazing experience that has been putting this webinar together and trying to imagine our future and which are the main challenges that we have to tackle upon our path. Of course, challenges of the future should be key to many dialogues with various actors in many regions. So we found this webinar of extreme importance, and we're very humbled for you inviting us today to share our view. When we were trying to put together this presentation with our team, we thought that maybe it would be nice to give a little bit of context of what Uruguay is and which are its assets, which are its weaknesses. So I will start from that, and I will say, well, there we are. Uruguay is that orange dot over the South American continent, and we are just in between Argentina and Brazil. And that is not just a fun fact, but it's also very, very important for our history, because in a way, Uruguay was born in 1825 just as a buffer state, just to try to keep those two giants from fighting. And that thing that probably it's something that we inherit, it's something that has absolutely permeated to our culture, to our economy, and to the way we are today. We're also, in a way, when we're talking about location, we would say in between these two fabulous regions we heard before. And so we're kind of in the future of some of you and in the past of some of you. But of course, in what comes to development, Uruguay is probably struggling and really behind those regions we probably we saw before. Uruguay is a small country, not only in surface area, but also in population. Half of the population is centered in the capital, so that shows that we are a highly concentrated country that we have to work on. We, of course, in the region, we're not that bad. Our GDP per capita is very good. I mean, we're, depending on how you calculate it, we are second or third on the region, which is good. And we also have other traits that permeate to what are the economic activities that Uruguay perform. For instance, Uruguay is an absolutely flat country. We do not have any mountains whatsoever. We have a very good climate. We don't have any major catastrophes such as earthquakes or volcanoes, so on and so forth. Of course, we are going through the agribusiness. And also we have, for many years now, historically, a very good public education which is compulsory and also free at all levels, including university. So that traits, in a way, give space for what are our economic activities. We try to put some photographs just to get the presentation not that full of numbers. So which are our economic activities? Well, historically, Uruguay is centrated in agro and livestock, and of course, through time in agribusiness, which has developed very nicely upon the last years. Also, we have, as many other economies, a very high percentage of our GDP in traditional services. We have also a very good share of tourism. I'm sorry, it says PIB in the slides, but it should say GDP is the same, but it's put in Spanish. So we have another good percentage of tourism. And a good thing that we thought it would be nice to share with you is that Uruguay is having a thriving global services sector that, though it's still very small, it's actually growing. As you can see, for the last 15 to 20 years, it has tripled its participation on the GDP. So that's what we do. So let's see how we do it. And to see how we do it, we try to use some of the indexes that we use in the institute, just to try to keep track of how Uruguay is performing in the development path. And we choose to use here 3 different indexes. But what is very striking for us is that all the indexes and all the indicators that we use, they are consistently showing that Uruguay has a very strong institutions and very strong macroeconomic foundation. So in that sense, if for instance, if we look at the democracy index, we are the first country in Latin America to have to be ranked and the 15th overall the whole world. So it's something that we're really proud of. Probably we were discussing earlier that maybe has to be with that thing that being just in between Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil and Argentina, and just being the like the little sibling that is always trying to keep peace among the region. And for us, that's very important, and we really take a lot of pride on getting these institutions strengthened and the democracy. Other things that the indicator shows, and that's really important for the economy, as you saw earlier with the global services growing, is the ICT adoption that Uruguay has, and it has been growing over the past years. So all in all, in what comes to institution and macroeconomic conditions, things are going great with Uruguay. So in that way, what do we have? So if we have to choose, and we try to think a lot about which could be 2 or 3 or 4 pillars from which we could call assets to Uruguay to build competitiveness. And we thought of that, it's what it's put in the slide. And first of all, whatever I said, strong institutional and macroeconomic conditions. So the ground is set. So we have to grow from that. Apart from that, we have also a good ICT penetration and adoption. This was particularly really important in what came to the pandemic and the life-changing year that we had last year, that we have 2020, because the Uruguayan business were really able to change and adapt their business models just to be able to not close their businesses. So this ICT penetration and adoption, we think it's a very strong asset that Uruguay has and has to work upon. And the third place, then, of course, as I mentioned, we are focused on traditional primary activities such as agro and livestock, agribusiness, which are based naturally on natural resources. What we think is that we still have a lot of room for innovation, for technification and digitalization of these sectors and these activities, to increase the value added that Uruguay has as a small market, to be able to put that products into the world. As a fourth issue, we found that we have a thriving service sector, well positioned at the international level, that it's needed, and it needs the support of the whole country and the whole administration and universities and all actors to be able to position better and better in the future. So this is what we have. And we try to think how would like to see of Uruguay in the next couple of decades. So we try to put forward a vision of what we think Uruguay could be in the long future. So what we want to be the first country in the region with the highest competitiveness potential, that is with a macroeconomic system, with businesses that are able to produce high value, to communicate with each other, to have a very good system, an economic system, to deliver high competitiveness potential, and also to be able to translate that competitiveness potential, whatever we took from that competitiveness, as Marijo was saying, well-being, to translate it into the highest income per capita in the region, with the lowest levels of poverty, and also with social inclusion and cohesion. What we need for that, or which are we saying are the main key challenges that we have from the future to the future to be able to achieve that vision? Well, first of all, a clear macroeconomic development strategy. Of course, we saw that we have good economic activities that they are growing, good innovation put in place, but we do not see from the government, from the public administration, and also from other actors, a clear strategy of what the development at the micro level should be. We are good at the macroeconomic level, but we do not are organized to deliver the businesses and the industries and the activities a good support to be able to develop. So competitiveness. Second, we think that, and that's something that we talk all the time in Uruguay, being a small country, we really need an open and world-oriented economy. We are just now, I would say, locked in Mercosur, which is an agreement that we have in the region, but Uruguay should be able to make more interchanges with other countries to be able to open the world better and to put its products in a better and more valued way in the economy of the world. So internationalization. Third, something that it's really important in Uruguay is somewhat not that talked, that it's the regional and local development. So decentralization. We live in Montevideo. Our center is located in Montevideo. Most of the universities are located in Montevideo, which is the capital. But we study from here, and we study with a group of other researchers around Uruguay, that there are a lot of differences in terms of development, in terms of competitiveness potential, in what comes to the different regions inside Uruguay. So it's imperative that Uruguay starts bringing more activity, boosting innovation, boosting business activity into other places or other towns that are not Uruguay. Fourth, we were thinking about planning of populations and city growth. That probably it's rare for Uruguay because we are a small country and we really don't have a lot of birth per year. We're really not, Uruguayans are not birthing every year. But what we are seeing is that we are having a lot of immigration waves, especially with the pandemic, and especially with this region and with what is happening in Latin America. We're receiving a lot of people from Cuba, from Venezuela, from other parts of Latin America. And we think it's essential to plan and to be prepared to receive those people, those population. They're going to help the economy grow. They're going to make Uruguay grow, but we have to be able to give them access to a very good education, to a very good health system, and to try to incorporate them into this overall society. So that's why we put the word social inclusion, because we think, though we are historically a nation which is very homogeneous in a way, these immigration waves are obviously going to be a challenge in the future, and we have to be prepared to receive them and to give them what they really need. And last but not least, of course, innovation, which is trying to take value from whatever information, whatever knowledge business have, and try to make and boost that innovation and try to put it into what is historically our activities. agro, livestock, industrial activities. So keep on doing innovation, which is going to give us the potential to be able to gain the competitiveness to ultimately convert it into welfare. So all in all, what is our vision? Just to share and to summarize these 5 words that we chose from our vision and from what we think are the key aspects of the development, the future development in Uruguay. And of course, delighted to work together to see how our paths could encounter and how can we learn from each other. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think now I'm passing it to James.
Yes, thank you very much, Michaela, and thank you to all 3 of the speakers. I'm James Wilson. I'm Research Director Orchestra, and it's my pleasure to be moderating the discussion for the next half an hour that we have left. And I see already some very interesting questions coming through. But first of all, thank you very much to the speakers. I think those are 3 fascinating insights into economic development futures and the processes of thinking about economic development futures from 3 very different places and very different perspectives. So putting them alongside each other, I think we really get an idea of the richness of this question and the capacity there is to learn from each other in that sense. For me, I think although we've had 3 very different presentations, there are two kind of themes that run through them all and tie them together in some way. The first of those is this notion of there being transversal challenges or challenges that go across society. So they're not specific to any one firm or industry or group of actors, but they're actually challenges that have to be tackled together. And Jordan mentioned that in terms of the COVID pandemic. He also mentioned it in terms of the climate emergency. Marijo talked about transitions, the green transition, digital transition, social transition, which again go across all different actors of society. And Michaela's focused very clearly there on innovation as a transversal challenge, which she sees as really critical to the future of the economic development in Uruguay. So we have these kind of challenges that require collaboration and that require coming together. And I think the second thing that stands out to me is, again, tying the 3 together, is the focus on institutions. Again, Michaela was very clear on the strength of institutions in Uruguay and the reliance that Uruguay development has on that. Marijo talked strongly about public administration and the need for that to act as a catalyst in terms of fostering responses to those challenges. And Jordan talked a lot about the government in his community context and how government plays a really important role, a central role in terms of tying together that spiral that was so fascinating in terms of thinking about the economic development of his community. So I think those transversal challenges and the role that institutions and government play as a catalyst are kind of themes that come through very clearly. I think we'll jump straight into some of the questions that are coming through, because there are quite a few interesting questions, and the one that's being voted up to the top there from Jennifer, who asks specifically with respect to Jordan's notion on what we see when we look back. Who would like to hear more about that reflective process? I think that's a question that could actually be asked to all 3 of the speakers in terms of what are we learning from looking back in terms of looking forward. I think perhaps the starting point for thinking about our economic development futures is to think about where we are, how we got here, and what we could perhaps do differently to do better. So perhaps I'll go to Jordan first, given the question was directed to him, but then also interested to hear Marijo and Michaela's thoughts on that process of looking back to look forward. Jordan?
Yeah, sorry, I was typing my response as you were mentioning, so I was like, I'll finish my thought through typing so that it's there, so in case I respond and nothing is clear. But that looking back piece is really unique for our community. As I mentioned, we have 855 or so West Bank First Nation members. And so with our mandate, we're ensuring that they're the ones that guide the vision. You know, I'm just the representative, I'm their voice, one of the 5 voices around our political representation to make sure that their concerns are brought forward and addressed. But we also have those 10,000 non-members that live on our lands as well that pay taxes. And so transparency and accountability is extremely important to us. If they're going to be exactly what I mentioned, paying taxes to us, we want to ensure that they know exactly where those tax dollars are going. So if there's a need, and we've broken it up We have what's called an advisory council. So all those 10,000 members are broken up in basically the neighborhoods that they live in, and they elect a representative that represents their neighborhood. So if you live in a neighborhood without streetlights or sidewalks, then that's what they say. I want more safe streets, I want sidewalks, and I want street lighting. And then we take that into account. We identify the capital costs and expenditures for that, and say, okay, well, if you want this in your community, it's going to cost this much. So there's going to be a bit of a tax increase, and here's our proposal. And then we have a bit of a back and forth to say, okay, well, that's if the taxpayer residents say that's too much of a tax increase. We say, well, that's fine, but then you're not going to get maybe the street lighting or the sidewalks that you need. We're going to have to do that in progressive stages. So that's how we work locally within our communities, is making sure that everyone has a voice and everyone's concerns are met, but making sure that safety and quality of life is being cared for at the most. Our growth on WFN lands is largely based on retirees moving into our communities. So they want to feel safe, they want to feel protected. Being on a reserve in Canada, this is not something that's common to feel that sense of connectedness to a First Nation community. It's often quite the opposite, really. So building those bridges in between that constant communication, empowering it through our laws. The first law we created was that advisory council law to say all you 10,000 non-members who live on our lands are going to have a voice. You're not going to be able to elect your political representatives as chief and council, but you have your opportunity to elect your representative through your advisory council. The other need in this is to think a little more broad. So instead of working with City of West Kelowna and City of Kelowna as competitors saying, oh, we want to build something here, and I know you want to build something there, but ours is going to be bigger and better than yours. We see it as, okay, well, this is something that we need for our community, and this is why, not just for our WFN members, but those 10,000 non-members as well. So if it's a healthcare facility or a skate park or something like that, then we work with the City of West Kelowna, they're our closest neighbors, and we say, well, what are you building, so that we can complement that as opposed to compete with one another. So if you are building a sport court, well, then why are we building a sport court right next door where we're going to compete with one another? Let's complement what you have with what we can provide. And then same with City Kelowna, is we have lands on their side. So when it comes to forestry and all those relationships, I work locally through the regional district to maintain those relationships. But it's a lot about reflecting back as to what we have, knowing that what's going to be available in the future is going to provide much more opportunity that we might, as I might not know as an expert at this point. So we have to allow the future generations to make those decisions. What we have though in West Bank is land. Our projected growth on WFN far exceeds that of City of West Kelowna and the City of Kelowna. So we have to figure out what that looks like for us. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Our people want to slow down development. They don't want to see all of our nature being turned into apartment buildings. But we also have to understand that if we don't put the pieces in place now, that could start a bit of a wildfire if we don't start to control that. But it's also balancing that need for development to keep the economy running. I hope that helps. But I also provided a response via chat.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Thanks. Yeah, very interesting to hear the detail of the processes. Marijo, Michaela, would you like to jump in there on that process issue?
Yeah, I think that looking back for me is very important in the territorial development in order to take into account all that, how history affected on what we are now and who we are at this moment. For instance, in the case of the Basque Country, our history affected in which kind of cultural issues we have at this moment. We are a region, a community with a high sense of community and identity. And also there are other issues such as, for instance, the values that you have at the territory, which kind of activities have been developed during the history. It's not the same to have a lot of industry or to have agro-food or to have different kind of activities. Also the institutions that you have, the political system that you have, because everything affects the development of the territory. So to understand very well which are the history of each territory, the identity, values, what wants this community to be, is very important to construct the future. And about thinking on the future, I think that the process, because we have been explaining and speaking a lot about the what, but how we can construct the future of our territories. And on this, what we learn on our experience from orchestra is that these processes are very complex, and it's very important to have in the process, even if we take into account the opinion and the vision of different people, it's very important to have a group of who takes the decision, to have in the group the people that takes the decisions about the future. And in our territory, the territorial strategy is defined mainly by policymakers. So that's why I think that it's important to have people. At this moment, we are trying to define the territorial development of the Basque Country in the future, no? And that's why it's important also to involve the Basque government, the provincial councils, the local development agencies, and see how to open this process to others. But it's important to have in the table people that takes decision, because otherwise we are just thinking but not doing. And it's important to think, but also to act on what we think to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Marijo. Michaela, did you want to add anything there?
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, the one up from history and from the past. Of course, I agree with the two panelists that are talking with me that I said that the challenges of the future are really important, and we should maintain a continuous dialogue about the issues and the key aspects of what we're going to do for the future development. But it's not possible to see the future if you do not take into consideration what is your past. So what's your history, where you come from, which are why your culture is like it is, why your economy is like it is. So try to understand what happened in the past is the one thing that is going to help you to understand what could happen in the future. So it's absolutely important to be always aware of the history, always aware of what happened, not only because it helps you to get to know you as a society and get to know you as a country and as economy, but also because of the learning experiences that you had. So in that sense, though Uruguay is a relatively young country, I think that we have a lot of learning points to take into consideration from our past that we should take into consideration for the future and for the decisions that we have to make. In that sense, and also trying to go into some of the other words that I heard previously from other presenters, is that also we can learn from this experience, because the past, not only our history, but also the history of other regions are important to be able to learn from other experience. In that sense, the role of universities and institutions and these actors that come together just on this webinar, just to learn from each other and just to try to not to make the same mistakes that maybe other regions make in the past. So in that sense, not only learn from your own history, but also try to learn from the history of other regions. I think that could enrich a lot what could be done in the future.
Thanks, Michaela. I think you've made also a neat link there, mentioning universities, into a series of there's several questions that are coming up around the role of universities, and I think that also links very neatly into Ananya's opening comments, where she mentioned the kind of anchoring role that universities could play in this local, global mix of issues, and the kind of unique role that universities are positioned to play. There's a question from Kel, and also from Yvonne. And from Alida, all kind of asking in different ways about what roles universities can, should, are playing in these types of reimagining economic development futures processes. Specifically, Malida's asking about the kind of action research processes that Marijo mentioned and Ivan mentioned in the context of orchestra. But more generally, I think again it's something that will be interesting to hear the views of the three panelists. From Jordan's perspective, from your community community perspective, what role do you see of the university in terms of your community? And from Marijo and Michaela's perspectives, who both work in research institutes that are very much working on these issues, was how are you playing a role in these processes in your territories, and how could that role be strengthened? I don't know who would like to go in first there.
Yeah, I will start. Yes, I think that at the universities we evolve from in orchestra. We have an evolution from doing just analysis and doing reports and research, desk-based research, in doing research, co-generating knowledge in interaction with different stakeholders. And in these processes, for instance, one of the questions is how to help in the inclusiveness of the economy with this kind of approaches. And one of examples that we, through different projects, we develop with the Basque government, provincial councils, and local development agencies, has been the development of a new multi-level governance system in the Basque territory. Some years ago, provincial councils have their own laws, but without taking into account the reality of different SMEs, and they didn't have a network of how to connect with the needs of SMEs in the territory, in all the Basque country. And at this moment, there is a network of local development agencies that develop new capabilities, in which orchestra was involved in the development of these capabilities at local development agencies to connect with firms, vocational trainings, and so on, in order to have an territorial intelligence on which are the needs that have specific small and medium enterprises. And this helped to connect these needs with the provincial council. And now there is a governance system in which the provincial council have a table, a round table, where local development agencies participate. It's like a team, and you have a territorial team in which you define the different programs in a bottom-up approach. So the programs are much more adapted to the different to the needs of different kinds and typologies of SMEs. And this is helping. This governance system is helping also to address other challenges. For instance, at this moment, the environmental challenge. This governance model in which you have a team with territorial actors at local level, provincial level, and regional level is useful also to improve the policies in other areas, in education, environment, and so on. So this is an example of how, in dialogue with them, orchestra, is affected in the change process of these actors. Yeah.
Thanks, Marijo. Mika, if I go across to you, and also I see there's a question directly from Baquiso here on the specific role in Uruguay around academia in encouraging business innovation. So linking back to your points on innovation could perhaps be an interesting slant.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the question. And yes, just building on what Marijo said, which I think it's really interesting from the orchestra and the Basque Country experience. We probably have like it has become like a mantra here in our institute or in our classes in economic, just to say that in Uruguay we have to step from the government policy to a state policy. So in a way, government, of course, they are the one that makes the overall the ultimate decision, but the state policies, just to be able to have a long-term vision and a long-term plan that goes beyond the 5 years of administration, we think it's really important for the economic development of the country and economic development of the future. In that sense, I think that universities' role, in line with, for instance, other actors, as Marijo was also mentioning, and I would say other NGOs, multilateral banks, and multilateral institutions that are more permanent in a way, so they can keep up with this vision of this long-term vision on what to do, on long-term strategy, or what to do to be able to achieve that future that we want. So in a way, the universities, it's a very good way to try to be the permanent actor in a way that could keep on with the dialogue. Also, in universities, we're known just to be at least of impartial part in this overall challenge that we have in the development. So I think that also the academia has a role on trying to be the translator in a way from the businessman to the political man. And so in that way, I think we could really help to the communication among these actors. And also, going to Bisco question about the innovation, and also Marijo pointed that out. Universities have the capability to understand what are the needs of the businessman, understand what are the needs of the business and in industries and the clusters that you have in your economy. And so we are able to analyze that, translate that into more plain words that the public administration is able to translate into direct actions that could also benefit the business. And innovation is of course one of the main issues that we have to tackle. So in order to be able to understand which areas of the business we have to support, university has a very good role to play in that, and to be able to bring that information into the decision makers.
Thanks, Mika. Jordan, would you like to comment on this role of university from your perspective?
Absolutely. I think there's an absolutely important role for education to play in creating connections. I mentioned that when it came to climate change, it's not something that we can compartmentalize and say, let's put this one person or these three people on this and try to make and fix climate change. It's impossible. If we want to do that, we have to acknowledge that it affects each and every one of us in all the aspects of our work. And I see education is very important in creating that understanding of that flow between departments, between faculties of Indigenous knowledge in particular. I'm obviously a little bit biased being an Indigenous person, but those values that are instilled within that. So when we talk about things like health and wellness and nursing programs being offered out of UBC, that there's an Indigenous component to that, a sensitivity that's created, so that moving forward into the healthcare system with these new professionals, we have a common understanding of historical traumas so that we can address those issues with respect, with knowledge, and consistent approaches across the board. So it's not just one person, one doctor who did a little more research than the next doctor. It's starting from the grassroots. And so I see that happening all across the board. What I struggle with when it comes to Indigenous knowledge is that educators in particular want to segregate that into something that is stereotypical of Indigenous representation, often art, often history, often culture. Those types of pieces. What they devalue is our contributions to science, our contributions, like I said, to health and well-being, to this collective knowledge of sharing with one another, providing for one another, just basically being good people. So there's definitely a role in education just to make sure that those next generations that are coming up are more alive to the issues that we face locally, but also globally. And then serving as the example moving forward of relationship builders. UBC in particular is doing great work in establishing connections to not just West Bank First Nation, but throughout our entire nation, so that there's an understanding that although maybe West Bank's at the table today, we still have a responsibility to make sure we're being inclusive to the other aspects of indigeneity. There's one West Bank First Nation member presenting today, but I don't have all the answers. So it's my responsibility as an elected official today to make sure that I'm garnering as many perspectives to bring forward. And that includes the non-Indigenous perspective, because we're colonized. I'm going to say it. Indigenous people in Canada, especially in the Okanagan, are colonized. And so our thinking is still coming from that same paradigm. But now we're starting to blend that back into an Indigenous pedagogy that supports collaborations, that starts to eliminate the idea of competitiveness, as I mentioned, and starts to build a complementary system so that we're not duplicating the work across in one region especially, but even across the province and across Canada. So that's where I see it.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Fascinating. Yeah, we're struggling for time. Unfortunately, we've got lots more questions, but we've only got 9 minutes left. There's one question that was been voted right to the top, and now that I've said that, I can't see it anymore. But it was a question from Yvonne about international connections, essentially, and I think it will be a good place to perhaps close with thoughts from each of the speakers on, given that we set this webinar up to try and start a learning process across places about what we can learn from each other in terms of these quite difficult and, as we've seen, complex processes of envisaging the future and of putting in place processes to ensure that we have the types of economic development futures that we want as societies. So the question is, well, what can we learn? What types of connections do we need internationally to make this learning work? And not just the learning, but also to make the kind of different knowledge that we need from different places come together in the right way to meet the challenges that each of us are facing. I'm open to who wants to go in first there.
Well, I can start for once if you want. Well, I think that it's a key issue for the future, but it was a key issue for a long time. But I think that living this unforgettable 2020, we're going to embrace more on what international learning experiences can be and what we could get from this sharing at the international level. I mean, I don't know if we were imagining a webinar from, I don't know, 15 different countries to like we are doing today. And I think that's wonderful. So probably I'm a bit of an optimistic person, but probably to think this pandemic to be just a nice opportunity for us to learn that international cooperation is possible. International cooperation is at our hand. And we should use it more often. So as Ananya was saying at the beginning of this webinar, I mean, these international activities, we're doing this like in an everyday basis now. And I think that this learning process, it's more rich and it's more attractive to be able to imagine and reimagine the future of our different regions. How we do it, our life has changed. We are more in our desks, sharing virtually, that we are on personal environments or in personal meetings. So just, I think that Imagine tried to take this opportunity. It was awful, but also it brought us new ways of conducting business and conducting research, and just be more in contact with other researchers around the world and be able to learn from that. So international connections are key to understand the future path. And also one thing that it's really important, and I think it's important for competitiveness, is something that Jordan mentioned when he was talking about the different regions and the different people, that they were thinking about being the process like a zero-sum game. International cooperation is not a zero-sum game. It's not something that if we help our partner, we are going to lose. No way. If we help our partner, we are both going to gain, and we're both going to learn, and we're both going to achieve the kind of vision that we want for the future.
Thanks, Michaela. Thanks. Mariko or Jordan? Mariko, I see.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot to learn from each other on this kind of issues, but I think that one specific issue that worries a lot to us is how to construct these collective processes and how to engage people in these collective processes in a way in which everybody has a voice. So you need to make a quite efficient process, but also with a very democratical process. So we have a lot of questions about the how we can construct, and I think that this is a common issue for all of us. Maybe we some of us will develop some kind of industries, others, but I think that the how is something common that we have to work, taking into account the institutional context that each of us has in our territories.
Thanks, Mariko. Jordan, over to you for perhaps the common world.
Real quickly, I agree, especially with what Mika had mentioned there, that there's there's a benefit in sharing knowledge and sharing progress with one another, not seeing each other as a competitor, but seeing each other as an ally and saying, how can I help you, as opposed to what are you doing that affects me? I think there's value, and this is what my approach, and I really saw that as really kind of a narrowed approach, but it's a very indigenous approach. I speak to my elders, and the first thing they say is, you need to make a decision, you need to leave your ego at the door. And so I don't know everything. I don't know what we can do to fix our forestry issues in a regional scale. I know what we've been able to do locally within our own corporate structure to reimagine what forestry can be. So it's not going into the mountains, clear cutting a bunch of trees, making a bunch of money. It's saying, what are we going to need in 200 years for our people? If we want to keep a forest alive and keep the industry alive, what practices do we need to institute now in order to make sure that my great grandchildren are going to be able to log the same areas or just steward the same areas? And that might mean not just taking trees, that might be more of a replanting of native plants and starting to generate an economy based on that. And in that way, it requires a bit of leaving that ego at the door, saying our knowledge isn't our knowledge anymore, it's our knowledge together, and our medicines are here for all the people. So if we're able to regenerate some of those indigenous plants and medicines and create a bit of a product out of that benefits everyone else, then that's great. However, globally, I know that there's some answers in other areas where deforestation is tremendously affecting regions. And so understanding those impacts and what has happened already, and taking that and saying, we don't want to get to that point, because this has ruined not just their economy, the entire country in many cases. So how do we avoid that? But also, what are the good examples as to what is being done, so that we can pull from those good ideas, take a little bit or whatever's going to work in our region, because what's going to work in Uruguay, for example, might not work in the Okanagan, just based on the ecosystems. But there might be concepts that we might be able to borrow and share with one another. And so it's about understanding that we all bring something to the table. We need to listen to one another, but we also need to be honest with ourselves and the limits of our own knowledge. And that's where we have to kind of just be honest with one another and listen carefully and respectfully.
Thanks very much, Jordan. That notion of the limits of our own knowledge is very important, I think, and a real motivation in a way for this process that we wanted to start today with this webinar, which hopefully will carry discussions on. I'd like to just pass back now to Roger Sugden, who will I think say a few words to close, given that we're now just about at closing time.
Thanks ever so much, Jamie. Thanks, Jordan and Marijo and Mika. I knew this was going to be fun and so much going on, but my goodness, it was, and really thank you for that. I do, in closing, want to say something about universities, if I may. But before doing that, and before people leave, I do also want to give a big thanks to various people behind the scenes who have kind of technically, etc., made this work. And this is not technically it's just techie. It's like, without these people, there would have been no webinar. So in particular, I just want to mention and give huge thanks to Nagore Vache Gonzalez from Orchestra, and then from UBC, Sue Ann Brown and Raina Redcliffe and Nathan Skolsky and Kristen Brook. Thank you ever so much for enabling this to happen. Just wanted to, I know it's time, but as everybody who knows me, I'm not very good at timekeeping, so just 2 or 3 minutes, if I may. This is a webinar about economic futures, and what's so clear with the speakers today is that this is not economic narrowly understood. This is truly socio-economic. This is truly wide-ranging and holistic, and necessarily so in order to address our futures. And indeed, some people sometimes wonder, what does socioeconomic mean? Well, listen to this webinar and it will give you an idea in practice of some of what it means. Because of all the conversation about relationships and inclusion and so on and so forth. And by the way, the webinar has been recorded. It will be put online. There will be some follow-up in a blog around Orchestra's blog as well. but the webinar will go online, so you can listen again. One thing I do want to pick up on as well is that, you know, there's been quite a bit of discussion about the role of universities or people like ourselves in some way, and in all of this. I do think much of, you know, what's been said and argued as critical factors to understand for our futures and for shaping our futures does need some discussion and debate based upon truth and with what Jordan just referred to, honesty. And in principle, universities are places where truth and honesty and so on can hold sway in some sense. In principle, that's not always the case, I don't think. Which actually also then reminds me, and this is the comment I wanted to make about universities. There's been the discussion today about the need to understand our histories, where we come from, to look back, to see it in this holistic way, and that therefore see our paths into the future and our choices about those paths in that holistic way. We should be aware, I think, that universities themselves they have a history. They are part of the wider history of the regions that we're a part of, and that we do need to reflect on those histories and how that's playing out today, and actually whether we need to make changes in ourselves in order to perhaps enable some of this activity and our influence in a positive way in terms of contributing to shaping the future, to be made the most of, let's say. Because I think it's on that basis, if we apply all of today also to ourselves, we can actually contribute and perhaps enable and foster and nurture some of the collaboration that will enable the commonalities to be identified and addressed together across regions, and the differences and distinctiveness to be understood and tolerated and respected and given full space, so to speak, because they're the essence also of the peoples in those regions. So let's not take universities for granted in this process either. We've got a lot of work to do in ourselves, and this is certainly the case, I think, in for example, UBC's case. With that, maybe again, just one more huge thanks. There will be more. The questions, we could have gone on longer, obviously. So we clearly need more of these sorts of activities and follow-ups and variations on these. And so I think a few of us will be meeting in the next couple of weeks and planning what to do so as we don't leave it too long before there's more of this. Meanwhile, I don't know about you, but I'm going to put on a coffee and then just think about all I've heard, because there's so much to take in. So thanks again, everybody. It's great. Take care.